Tonight, the militant tendency.
If they gain power, parliamentary democracy would disappear. They may gain power through parliamentary democracy by using the constitution. But once they go in power, we'd have a one-party state, and there would be no opportunity to change it.
Terry MacDonald is a Labour Party constituency chairman and an ex-militant supporter. Ted Grant is the founder of Militant, political editor of the weekly newspaper.
We stand for a peaceful transformation of society. We stand for the Labour Party getting a majority in Parliament, and then on the basis of that majority, abolishing the monarchy, abolishing the House of Lords by an Enabling Act, and taking over the 200 monopolies. We stand for complete democracy.
But do its followers share the aims of the Labour Party, or should the party expel them in the name of parliamentary democracy? TVI reports the argument over Militant. The weekly paper, Militant, is the motive force of everything else, the dynamic of the militant tendency. Marches, demonstrations, political gatherings are targets for the heavy sell. At 20p a time, Militant claims a weekly sale of 30,000 copies. For some of those thousands, regular readership will lead on to the next stage, the invitation to become a fully fledged supporter, they never say member, of the militant tendency. One ex-militant reflects on why it happened to him.
I think I was chosen by them as, to quote, a good type, someone who perhaps they could use. And
what does good type mean?
Well, it's a term which they use, somebody who, mainly in fact, they go for people who are virginal in politics. They normally don't go for people who have any kind of background. Somebody who perhaps has shown an interest in trade unionism, or perhaps has been involved in a demonstration of some type. Someone who they can see has potential.
Another port of call and protest for the Jobs Express. One of the bitter jokes on the train was, "This is the age of the dole." And among the ranks of the disillusioned, angry, jobless young, there are many who may listen to the voice of Militant, and Militant helped to organise their reception. For those who listen and want to learn more, there are teachers, ready and willing to respond.
When one first is interested in Militant, they'll kind of assign a person to guide your political education, and they'll give you books to read, old Marxist classics and militant pamphlets and back copies of the Militant newspaper and all the other publications they produce to read, and you'll be expected to discuss those with the person who's trying to recruit you into the Militant.
Those who are recruited by Militant as active supporters are expected to contribute at least a few pounds a week. That money, says Militant, is to maintain the newspaper and through it the expression of their viewpoint.
Many Rocksters throughout the country, we have a massive lobby, you know, of tens of thousands.
But Militant meant more than a newspaper to Terry MacDonald.
Well, I soon realised that this was a very well-organised party.
How would you spell out the difference between a well-organised tendency and a party within a party?
Well, a well-organised group meet fairly frequently and have common aims, but Militant has full-time offices. In Liverpool it has 4 or 5. It asks for a weekly sum or subscription of you. And the policies aren't so much made by this group, but come from elsewhere.
From where?
Well, from the centre. That they have they tend to call their headquarters in the centre, and the line would come down from the centre.
The Centre is a building in the East End of London where the weekly paper is produced. Militant's editor is Peter Taff.
Well, Militant is the voice of the Marxist left of the Labour Party, and we've got growing support in all wings of the party. We have a majority support probably in the Labour Party Young Socialists. We have growing support within the Labour Party, probably maybe 200 to 300 constituency Labour parties. would support, if not all, certainly part of the programme of Militant. And of course we have growing support within the trade unions. We have probably about 5,000 committed supporters of the Militant who sell the paper, who give money regularly to the paper and so on.
And you have how many full-time staff?
We have about probably 60 at the present time who work for the Militant. That includes the people who work here at where the paper is produced, and also people who organise the sales of the paper in the provinces.
And of course, once they sell the paper, once they have the ideas, they put forward these ideas in the trade unions, in the Labour Party, and among the mass of the working class as a whole. Our main activity is building the Labour Party, building the trade unions, building the movement as a whole. But within that we have our own point of view.
The P&O strike, where 150 seamen have been sitting in until they know the terms that a new operator of the Belfast ferry service will offer. Tony Mulhern is a militant and chairman of Liverpool District Labour Party. On board one of the ships, he discusses the men's grievances.
There's not enough guarantees in it, which what you were after originally, weren't you?
We've gone from a position, a very, very strong position.
I think they've been paid off by the P&O myself.
Yeah.
We go where the working class are. We are part of the working class movement, and in that sense, as you use the word target, we would use the term of the organisations of the working class of which we are part. And in fact, we advance our programme, we advance our ideas, and in fact, ideas which really are part and parcel of the labour movement itself.
Liverpool Council typists have been on strike since July, but some have gone back to work. Now the obstacle to a settlement is the Council's demand for no disciplinary action against strikebreakers. Urging the strikers to stand fast, a militant Labour councillor, himself a Nalgo member.
I think it's very significant and certainly takes note of the panic that must be on the faces of many of those chief officers and many of those individuals who've happily sat in work, watched you out in the cold and treated you with nothing but contempt. And as far as I'm concerned, the action that you take against those which you will decide will have our full backing. And in conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I would just like to say that I'm sure that everyone in this hall has learnt many lessons from this dispute. It's often said that you learn far more in 5 minutes of struggle than you do in 20 years of reading.
What we've said is that when we return to power, that we want to see socialist managers of the local authority. As far as we're concerned, there is no position within the career structure for those people who've shown themselves to be very anti-trade union and have no real concern for the people of this city and for the employees. And if that means a degree of positive discrimination, if that means that certain people are going to suffer, well, so be it.
The Liverpool headquarters of Militant is a house in the Kirkdale area. They bought it from the Labour Party, who still use it for local meetings. Militant also use it, of course, as an office for the newspaper and for their own meetings. In Liverpool politics, they've become a highly effective force. The city is run by a Conservative and Liberal alliance, but the biggest single group is Labour, where Militant have a tendency to get their own way. A long-serving Labour councillor describes how Militant, with the help of other left-wingers, go about it.
When the council agenda is received on a Friday before the Labour group meeting on a Monday, it's quite common, the practice for Militant, to have a meeting, the 10 of them, 9 or 10 of them, and go through that agenda and decide what they want to support, what they want to carry. They then go to a further meeting on the Sunday morning where there are members, the other 15 members who are the broad left but not militants of the Labour Party. They then get together, but of course they don't all turn up. There's generally 20, 18 or something of that order turn up. So when Militant get their viewpoint there, they carry that majority at that secondary meeting. Then when they turn up to the Labour group, of course, by and large, the broad left and the Militant have then got a common policy, and they come in, they're voting something like 23, 24 votes at that meeting. 23 or 24 votes beats 13 or 14 every time. And that way, they can control the Labour group on the City Council.
But is that in itself undemocratic, to hold pre-meeting meetings and to try and get support from the left broadly?
Normally speaking, that's not undemocratic. People have often met together, you know, within Parliament, this Tribune group and the Manifesto group. That's not uncommon. What makes it dangerous in this case is that Militant is not loosely association of people. They are a very close-knit, disciplined section of the party. And I don't think their aims and objects are in accordance with what the Labour Party was set up for.
Militants' untiring political activity is carried out in the name of the Labour Party and their own.
Have you ever seen the paper, The Militant?
Yes, I have seen it, yeah.
You seen, you know, because we're, you know, a tendency in the Labour Party who support this paper, like, and what we're fighting for.
From the Labour Party, just can't see what you'll be voting in the election. Oh, SDP. You're voting SDP?
Would you like to buy a copy of the paper?
Yes, OK.
This is what it's got, you know, Labour's youth on it, the YS application form, but it is valid.
The application form is a young socialist form, a quite legitimate way of joining the Labour Party, but through an organisation whose leadership is militant. Through energy, dedication, discipline, turning up to packed party meetings when others don't bother, militant strategy pays off.
Well, they have, as I say, you know, branches, and they're gradually infiltrating, you know, hedge hopping from ward to ward, taking over wards, ensuring that the candidates get nominated for the local council.
What does hedge hopping mean?
Well, they move people around as they gradually take over a ward. And of course, they now control the DLP, which of course the DLP is the policy-making body for the local council and for the local Labour Party.
The DLP is the
District Labour Party. Now, and by controlling that, I mean nobody can fight against that, because of the Constitution, which says that the District Labour Party makes the party policy which must be obeyed.
The next target for Militant is the House of Commons. Tony Mulhern, chairman of the District Labour Party, is the prospective candidate for Trotskyist. He could be one of the first militant MPs.
I'm Tony Mulhern, the Labour Party parliamentary candidate for Trotskyist. And I'm introducing myself to the people in the area, asking you if you've got any problems.
But the possibility of militant supporters being elected as Labour MPs makes more urgent the question of a Trotskyist's commitment to parliamentary democracy.
I reject entirely the suggestion, and Shirley Williams said it the other day at the, after the count at Crosby, that the extreme left, whoever that may be, and is opposed to parliamentary democracy. That is an absolute fairy tale. We've argued consistently for the ideas that that socialism is achievable through parliamentary means. What we have said is that if parliamentary democracy is ended in Britain, it'll come from the extreme right.
But criticism of militants' aims doesn't only come from the right or from the SDP. Frank Field, the left-wing Labour MP for Birkenhead, has grave doubts about militants' long-term faith in parliamentary democracy.
This is the rub. Is Militant using democracy as a tactic, or do they believe it? Now, I believe it, and that's why one suffers defeats and one comes back and tries to fight from a basis of defeat to convince people. If, for example, one had Militant winning the Labour Party, how many of us would survive in it much longer? I mean, leaving apart the fact that some would leave, would we not actually face expulsions very quickly, just as at University College the various Trotskyite factions dubbed the Tribunite students there as closet SDPers who should be drummed out the party because the Trotskyites are in the majority. That's what's waiting for us. That's what the British voter smells and doesn't like it.
They don't see policies as ones that will be implemented. Their policies are in their language, they're to raise consciousness. They're very directly derived from Trotsky's theory of the transitional demand. It's quite simple. You put forward a demand that seems okay, but which can't actually be realised under a capitalist system, so that people get drawn into the campaign for these demands. Capitalism can't deliver the goods, so therefore they become socialists, and they therefore start demanding an insurrectionary change from capitalism to socialism, which is very different from that of the traditional Labour left that don't see change to socialism coming through insurrection, through a sudden overnight coup or whatever, but through a process of consent, through a process of winning bigger and bigger parliamentary majorities.
Why are you personally so antagonistic to them? You've been with them and you've left them.
Because I'm a Democrat. Okay, I'm a socialist. But I want to put forward policies to the people and be elected into government. And if the people don't like that, I want them to be able to change in that government. If Militant take over, they're a totally undemocratic organisation, though they're working within the Constitution, we'll have a one-party state.
So the charge is that a militant-controlled Labour government would not accept being voted out of office.
That's entirely untrue, because on the basis of our programme, we want a 35-hour week, a £90 minimum wage, full employment, a massive expenditure on the social services and so on. It wouldn't be necessary. Who would vote against a government of that sort, which within 10 years, on the basis of microelectronics and so on, would be entirely possible to have a standard of living for every family of over £200 a week and working 4 or 5 hours a week? That's according to capitalist scientists themselves, if the resources are used. At this moment, only 70% of the productive capacity of the country is being used. Even to use 100% of productive capacity could mean an extra £50 or £60 a week to every family in the country. Now, if you carried out a programme of that sort and at the same time nationalise the press so that everyone has access to the media in proportion to their votes in the election, how could there wouldn't be any question of being voted out. If we were voted out, if the electorate were mad enough to vote us out under those conditions, it would be impossible, we would accept it. But it's clear that we wouldn't be voted out, because all the
programme mightn't work.
It would work. Why? There's absolutely no reason why the programme shouldn't work. If we take over the economy, then it's entirely possible to plan the society. And once you take over the economy, it'll be entirely possible to improve the conditions of the mass of the population to such an extent that it's very unlikely that there would be a counter-revolution, if you like.
But I'm not talking about counter-revolution. I'm talking about the ballot box voting out a government if it feels that it hasn't succeeded in achieving its objectives.
Well, then we would accept that, but we can't see that our objectives could not be achieved.
I hope that we will have an NEC inquiry, and I hope the inquiry will do two things. And when it's done that, I hope it won't, like last time, for a party that believes in open government, decide not to publish the inquiry. I hope the inquiry will be published with the NEC endorsement. And that inquiry, the two things that I wanted to do is, first of all, to spell out the structure. Here is the organisation operating within the Labour Party. That's important to do. And then secondly, it is a battle for ideas. There isn't any easy solution about carving people up and kicking them out. I wish it wasn't as easy as that. But we've actually got to win a large number of the militant supporters back into the mainstream of loyal Labour Party support. And that's got to be done by exposing what Militant is about, the nature of its policies, which are not democratic socialism at all.
It would be no good prescribing militants. I don't think prescribing anyone has ever done any good. Because if you prescribe them, they'll just say, oh, well, we've left militants, and they will still stay there with the same sort of cell network within the Labour movement.
They should be prescribed, and known militant members should be expelled from the party.
That, of course, sounds like witch hunt.
Yes, but if you have a disease, a diseased hand, you cut it off, you don't allow it to take over your whole body.
If you were proscribed, if that point were reached, what would you then do? Would you abandon Militant and stay within the party, or would you abandon the party in order to maintain Militant?
We would never abandon Militant under any circumstance. We'd have the same right as every other tendency, whether it's the New Statesman, the Tribune, or any of the right wing. They're incapable of even producing a paper of their own. That's the only reason that they didn't. We would still continue to support the Labour Party. We'd remain members of the Labour Party. It's impossible to witch hunt Militant from the Labour Party. And if any of us were expelled, we would fight for reinstatement into the Labour Party.
We will be restored with honour back to the movement if we were expelled. And those people on the right wing who are trying to drive us out, in the future they will join the rogues gallery of the traitors who've deserted this movement.
We need this inquiry. We need it to spell out, is Militant or is Militant not a party within a party? And is it or is it not using democracy as a tactic? And then when that report is published, either people like me have got a lot of apologising to do and I should be going around in sackcloth or ashes, or we will be using that report to mobilise the democratic strengths within the Labour Party to win through. And that's, of course, why militants now calling foul and throwing dust in people's eyes and saying that even Tribune's under attack. Tribune's not under attack at all. The legitimate left is not under attack. We are questioning the role of this party within the party.